I never thought the man in charge of our entire police force would fake his identity just to catch his own men. It still sends chills down my spine when I think about it. Back then, I was just a regular officer doing my job, working the night shift, chasing petty thieves, writing reports that no one seemed to read. The department felt like a family. At least that's what I believed. But looking back, maybe I just didn't want to see the cracks, because there were signs. Whispers in the locker room, officers talking in hushed tones when certain names came up, reports disappearing, arrests that never got properly logged, complaints swept under the rug. And then, out of nowhere, a new guy joined us. Quiet, observant, said he was transferred in from another city. His name was Frank Dalton. He didn't talk much, but he had this way of watching people that made you feel like he could see right through you. No one questioned it. Why would we? People come and go in law enforcement all the time. But Frank wasn't just another officer. He was hiding something none of us could have imagined. He wasn't there to make friends. He wasn't even there to be part of the team. Frank was there to uncover a secret that had been buried inside our department for years, a secret so dirty, so twisted, that when it finally came out, some of us couldn't sleep for weeks. And the worst part, the rot wasn't from outside criminals, it was from within. This is the story of how our police chief went undercover, and what he uncovered was sickening, and I was right there in the middle of it. Chief Daniel Cross wasn't just respected, he was admired. In a city where trust in law enforcement had been fading for years, he brought something rare to the table: integrity. People believed in him. He didn't come from money or power. He grew up in a rough neighborhood, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. He used to say, "I know what it feels like to be afraid of the people who are supposed to protect you. That's why I became one of them." He started as a beat cop, walking the same streets he grew up on. He listened, paid attention, showed compassion, but never let anyone walk all over him. He climbed the ranks not because he played politics, but because he worked harder than everyone else. He kept his uniform clean, his record cleaner, and his word meant everything. When he was finally appointed chief, the whole city seemed to breathe easier. Officers saluted him with pride. Citizens felt like maybe, just maybe, things were changing. But that peace didn't last. Not long after he became chief, strange things started happening. Reports of violent crime were dropping on paper, but out on the streets, people were saying otherwise. Victims who came forward never got follow-up calls. A local reporter filed a public complaint that mysteriously vanished. And then there were the promotions, officers getting bumped up in rank who barely showed up to work. Others, the ones who tried to speak out, were transferred to desk duty, or reassigned overnight with no explanation. We all noticed it, but no one dared say it out loud. There was a tension in the air, like everyone was waiting for something to snap. But Chief Cross, he never said a word. He just kept working, kept smiling at press conferences, kept shaking hands and posing for photos. But behind that calm, confident face, he had doubts. He didn't trust the numbers. He didn't trust the reports. And slowly he began to suspect that the rot he'd fought so hard to fix had found a way to hide, right under his nose. And that's when he made the decision no one saw coming. No one knew what Chief Cross was planning. Not the captains, not the senior officers, not even his own assistant. The only person he told was the mayor, and even she thought he was taking it too far. But he didn't care. He needed to know the truth, and the only way to find it was to see it for himself. So he disappeared, quietly, no big announcement, just a short vacation on paper. A break, he told them. Nothing more, but a week later, a new officer showed up at our precinct with a transfer letter and a quiet smile. His name was Frank Dalton. At least, that's what we thought. He said he was from a small city a few hours away. Claimed he wanted a change of pace. The paperwork looked clean, the badge was real, and no one asked too many questions. Transfers happened all the time. I was the first one assigned to show him around. From the start, he seemed different. Not in a bad way, just quieter than most. He didn't brag, didn't talk about his past cases like so many of the others did. He watched, listened, paid attention to things the rest of us ignored. He was kind too, genuinely kind. The type who asked how your day was, and actually waited for the answer. Once, when my patrol car broke down, he stayed with me in the pouring rain until the tow truck came, even though his shift had ended hours earlier. Everyone liked him, but no one really knew him. And now I understand why. He wasn't here to fit in, he was watching, studying, trying to figure out who he could trust and who he couldn't. I remember asking him once, just as a joke, "You sure you're not undercover, or something?" He laughed, said, "If I were, would I tell you?" I laughed too. But looking back, his eyes didn't. They were serious, focused, almost sad. At the time I brushed it off, but now I know Frank Dalton didn't come to join us. He came to expose us. And we had no idea. It didn't take long before Frank started noticing things the rest of us had either gotten used to or learned to ignore. At first, it was subtle. During a routine drug bust, he asked why the amount of cash reported didn't match what he saw at the scene. The lead officer brushed it off, said he must have miscounted. But Frank didn't let it go. Then there was the time he rode along on a call that ended in an arrest. The suspect had bruises that weren't there when Frank cuffed him, but the official report claimed he'd resisted violently. When Frank questioned it, the paperwork was suddenly corrected. That's when things started getting tense. Officers began watching him closely. Conversations would go quiet when he walked into a room. His requests for case files got lost or delayed. One afternoon, Sergeant Green, an old-timer everyone respected, pulled Frank aside in the parking lot. I saw it happen. They weren't yelling, but I could tell it wasn't a friendly chat. Later that day, Frank told me what Green had said. "Listen, rookie. Around here, we look out for each other. Keep your head down, do your job, and let things be. You start poking where you don't belong, you'll regret it." It wasn't a warning, it was a threat. That's when I started getting scared, not just for him, but for myself. Because I'd seen some of the same things. I'd written reports that disappeared. I'd been told to clean up incident details, so they looked better for the stats, but I never questioned it. Not because I agreed with it, but because I didn't want to become a target. And now Frank was drawing all the heat, but he didn't back off. He got bolder, started staying late to recheck files, took notes in a little black notebook he kept in his jacket, asked quiet questions no one else had the nerve to ask. One night, I found him in the evidence room, just sitting there, staring at a box marked closed case. He looked tired, worn down, like the weight of everything he was uncovering was too much to carry alone. I asked him if he was okay. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "No, but I will be. If I get what I came for." I didn't know what that meant. Not fully. But part of me started to realize. He wasn't just looking for answers. He was preparing for something big. And I had a sinking feeling that when it happened, nothing would ever be the same again. Then, just like that, Frank was gone. No explanation. No goodbye. One night he was working late, and the next morning, his desk was cleared out, his name wiped from the patrol schedule. No one mentioned it directly, but the whispers started fast. Internal affairs pulled him. He was dirty. He overstepped and got himself reassigned. The rumors came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. But none of them made sense. I knew him. Or at least, I thought I did. Frank wasn't the kind of man to disappear without a word, especially not when he'd worked so hard to get so close to something. I felt sick. Uneasy. Something wasn't right. That evening, I went to my locker and found a folded piece of paper slipped between my gear. No name. Just my badge number written on the front in his handwriting. Inside it read, "If anything happens to me, look inside locker 22B. Be careful who you trust." My hands were shaking as I made my way to the back of the locker room. Locker 22B belonged to no one. It had been marked as broken for months, taped shut with a "Do Not Use" sign. I checked to make sure I was alone, then I pulled off the tape and opened it. Inside was a black duffel bag. Neatly packed. No name tags. Just sealed envelopes, a hard drive, and a small hidden camera. When I got home, I locked the door, closed the blinds, and sat on my floor for hours watching the footage. What I saw made my stomach turn. Officers I'd trusted, people I'd had coffee with, celebrated birthdays with, caught on tape taking money during busts, tampering with drugs, swapping clean evidence bags for dirty ones, writing completely fake narratives in their reports. Even worse, there were voice recordings, conversations about payoffs, backroom deals, and threats made against anyone who asked too many questions. One voice I recognized immediately: Sergeant Green, the same man who warned Frank to mind his business. And there was more. Copies of falsified arrest records. Real witness statements hidden behind fake ones. It was all there. Neatly organized. Each piece linked to a badge number, a case file, a name. Frank hadn't been pulled by internal affairs, he'd been set up, or worse, silenced. The weight of it hit me like a punch. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. I just sat there, my hands pressed against my mouth, as everything I thought I knew about the people I worked with shattered into pieces. And all I could think was, what do I do now, because if they found out I had this, I might be next. A few days later everything changed. The mayor called a surprise press conference early in the morning. No advance notice, no press release, just an urgent message to every department head to be present. The media was already there when we arrived, cameras pointed, microphones ready. I remember standing in the back of the room, my heart racing. Something was coming. I could feel it. The mayor stepped up to the podium, her face stern, voice steady. "We've launched a full investigation into the city police department," she began. "Over the past 3 months, a covert operation has been underway, led by one man who risked everything to uncover the truth." She paused, looked out across the room. Then she said the name. "Frank Dalton, is Chief Daniel Cross." The room exploded. Gasps. Shouts. Disbelief. Some officers started whispering to each other, others just stared blankly at the screen behind her as a picture of Frank flashed on the monitor, clean-shaven, calm-eyed, and unmistakably him. I froze. I couldn't believe it. The man I sat next to in the patrol car. The man who stayed behind after shift to help finish reports. The man who brought me coffee without ever asking how I liked it, because he already knew. He was Chief Cross. The same man whose portrait hung on the wall in the precinct. The same man I'd saluted every morning as I walked into work, and now I realized. Everything he did, every risk he took, every late night and silent stare, it all made sense. He wasn't just watching us. He was protecting the city in a way no chief ever had, not from outside threats, but from the corruption rooted inside his own department. And suddenly I felt this mix of shame and awe, because while the rest of us turned a blind eye or stayed silent, he'd put on a badge with a fake name, stepped into the mess, and lived the truth we were too scared to face. He didn't just uncover the rot, he lived in it, and still didn't let it change who he was. What followed the mayor's announcement felt like a storm ripping through the heart of everything we thought we knew. By the next morning, internal affairs was everywhere. Officers in suits moved through the building like ghosts, quiet but relentless. Desks were searched. Computers were seized. Some officers were escorted out in cuffs, others questioned for hours. But the worst part, some just disappeared. They knew what was coming. They ran. The news hit hard. Names I'd worked alongside for years were suddenly plastered across headlines, charged with evidence tampering, bribery, assault. Men and women who had once stood beside me in uniform, now facing years behind bars. It didn't end there. Someone desperate, tried to pin the whole thing on me. They claimed I'd helped hide the footage Frank collected, that I'd altered reports and deleted files. For a terrifying moment, it almost worked. I was pulled into questioning, told my name had come up in an anonymous tip. My stomach dropped. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. All I could think was, this is how they bury the truth. But then, Chief Cross. No more disguises, no more secrets, walked in. He handed over a sealed folder. Inside was security footage and written logs. Clear proof I'd been the one trying to help, not hide. He looked at me and said, "I wouldn't have made it this far without her." That moment saved me. But it didn't erase the damage. Trust. once cracked, doesn't just grow back. Internal Affairs launched a full-scale investigation. Dozens of officers were suspended. Cases were reopened. Some victims who had been ignored finally got justice. And the department. It changed. Policies were rewritten. A civilian review board was created. Leadership was overhauled. But the emotional toll that didn't go away. I couldn't sleep for weeks. Couldn't walk into the precinct without scanning every face, wondering, did they know? Were they part of it too? There were people I'd once called brothers and sisters in blue that I could no longer look in the eye. The silence in the halls, once filled with chatter and jokes, felt heavier now. Like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see who'd be next. And me. I felt torn, grateful that the truth had come out. But heartbroken by what it revealed. Because the badge is supposed to mean something. But for too many of us, it had become a mask. And once that mask was ripped away, all that was left behind was the painful truth of who we really were. In the months that followed, the dust began to settle. Slowly. Unevenly. But it did. Chief Daniel Cross, no longer hiding behind the name Frank Dalton, became a symbol, not of perfection, but of what it means to stand for something, even when it costs you everything. He was offered a promotion to lead a state-level anti-corruption task force. It was a big deal. He'd have the power to investigate departments across the state, clean out the rot, and train the next generation of real leaders. He hesitated. I think part of him still carried the weight of what he'd seen here. But eventually he accepted. And me. I thought about leaving. I won't lie. There were days when I couldn't face the building. Days when I stared at my badge, and wondered if it meant anything at all. But something in me couldn't walk away. Not yet. I stayed. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. There were still good people here. Quiet. Overlooked. Honest ones. And I realized that if we all walked away, we'd be leaving the department in the hands of people who didn't care enough to change it. So I stayed. To help rebuild. And little by little, we started earning back the community's trust. Not through speeches or press releases, but by showing up and doing the work, honestly, humbly. One evening before he left for his new role, Chief Cross, still frank to me in so many ways, found me on the back steps of the precinct, where he used to take his breaks. He sat beside me quietly for a moment, then said, "You were braver than you realize." I told him I wasn't. That I had been scared the entire time. He smiled. That's what courage is. Being scared. And doing it anyway. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out that same little black notebook, and handed it to me. For when someone else needs help finding the truth, he said, pass it on. And with that, he walked away. Not as a hero. Not as a chief. Just a man who refused to be silent. And left behind a legacy built not on power, but on truth. Sometimes, doing the right thing means becoming the enemy in your own home. You face the silence, the whispers, the broken friendships. You lose trust. And sometimes, you even lose yourself. But truth doesn't stay buried forever. It has a way of coming out, no matter how deep it's hidden. And when it does, it can be painful, but it can also set us free. If you were hooked by this story, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us tell more powerful stories like this. Stories that remind us why truth matters, even when it's hard to face. Thank you for listening.